Extra left field.
You bet.
Yeah, yeah, so I'm not going to pull up the stage.
Spying on her.
Ευχαριστώ.
New Zealand?
Just can't get over what a great job they did.
Blow the whistle. Oh, good thing that wasn't on. I did that once in a journalism class of mine. A couple of students in the back, they're still trying to peel them off the ceiling from a few years ago. My name is Andy DeBillis. I am the Athens correspondent for a newspaper and website in New York City called the National Herald, which is pretty much the paper of record for the diaspora and people around the world of Greek heritage, Hellenophiles who want to know what's going on here. It's taken me a while to find out myself, too. When I first came here, I met a priest who knew someone I knew in Boston, and he told me a story that was uniquely Greek, made me feel more comfortable. He said it was, he had been assigned to an island, and it was a kind of the Greek man was a bit of a hermit, and had a dog, and the dog died, and he said the man came to him and said, "Father, could you please say a service in the church?" And he said, "Gosh, we don't say services for, animals. Take it to the Catholics, they'll do it." And he said, "Well, Father, I'll make a small donation." He said, No, please, go to the Catholic Church. And he saw him a couple of days later, and he said, "How did it go, Acosta?" And he said, "They were very nice to me. They said the service for the dog, and they were happy with the 10,000 euros I gave them." He says, "El Acosta, you didn't say it was a Greek Orthodox dog, Well, before I introduce the panel a little bit, please, I want to acknowledge a couple of people who made a lot of work here. P, where are you? P.E., where is she? Oh, right here, there she is, from Transparency International. Did wonderful work helping organize this. Yana, my partner Yana Andoniou, who helped immensely. Dino, where are you? My buddy Dino Sirogas from New York City. He didn't apparently read our own paper because he moved here. Everybody else was moving there. So he's a real crack at that when anybody needs some help. George Patmios was set up. Oh, Signomi. Elena Pataki, who's the publisher of this wonderful book. Thank you very much for helping put this together. It's very, very invaluable. And it really brings a spotlight to Greece at a critical time when there's so much going on as it is. A man you don't know, a favorite of mine from many years ago in the United States, I'm sure some on the panel know, the American humorist Will Rogers said that everybody, when it comes to corruption, which is tied inherently to whistleblowing, said it's awful hard to get people interested in corruption unless they can get some of it. That's kind of the problem here in some ways that people more expert than I on the panel will talk about, because it really is difficult to break that cycle when if you go to the doctor and it's going to be 100, it turns out to be 60 without the receipt. We're going to lead up to the overarching problem of whistleblowing and how it ties into national security, defense, international terrorism, and all that entails too. First, I'll introduce the panel, and we'll have them speak a little bit, and after each person speaks, they will be happy to take questions, so we don't have to wait till the end for it. And please jump in, and my experience as a journalist has taught me that all the best questions are under 10 words, so please try to keep them succinct as well, too. First, Dr. Celeste Dreyfus from the University of Melbourne. She is an information systems academic. She's a very noted researcher in public attitudes on the impact of technology and anonymizing, I'm going to have to go to anonymous technologies. Whistleblowing. She's the executive director of the international NGO Blueprint for Free Speech and has set up Blueprint Greece to track corruption and whistleblowing. I said you won't have to look too hard, too far. We'll be able to find that okay. Very prominent in the background, in a way, with a little social media thing called WikiLeaks. And as the author of the 1997 cult classic, Underground Hacking, Madness, and obsession on the electronic frontier. John Kiriakou, I'm happy to say a buddy of mine, was former editor and of the Athens News, managing director of the Lambrakis Group, commentator and contributor for CNN, Al Jazeera English, The Daily Beast, Washington Post, American Scholar, and the Weekly Standard. Can't hold the job more than one place, huh? Okay. Anna Damascu, Dr. Anna Damascu, is the chair of the board of Transparency International Greece, specialist in anti-corruption, banking compliance laws. Can you help me out with Eurobank? I got a little problem with them. But financial criminal law, EU financial criminal law specialist. She, before joining the compliance department of the Black Sea Trade and Development Bank, she worked for the Greek and Cypriot desk of the European Central Bank, a legal service, Hellenic Ministry of Development, Hellenic Capital Market Commission, the compliance department of the National Bank of Greece, and has been in the forefront, both as a researcher and now as chair of Transparency International, and trying to bring these levels down. She has her PhD from Queen Mary University and an LLM degree from the London School of Economics and Political Science. Tassos Teloglu, he needs no introduction, so we'll skip over it. Oh, no. Yeah, I'm sure you know him. He's one of the most famous and best investigative journalists in the country, in any country for that matter. He has been with Kathy Mirini. He's presenter of the weekly news program, The New Folders for Sky, winner of the Best Report of the Year for his expose on the Siemens slush funds scandal in Greece. And, of course, John Kiriakou. Let me get his credentials right before I say something more personal about him. Former CIA officer, Senate Foreign Relations Committee senior interrogator, who blew the whistle on the CIA's torture program. The closest I got to it was watching Zero Dark 30, but I was in the back row of the movie theater hiding into my popcorn. So you have the Courage Award here, too. Author, counterterrorism consultant for ABC News. He was the first U.S. government official to confirm the waterboarding was used to interrogate al-Qaeda prisoners. And his book in the United States, now here in Greece, thanks to Pataki Publishers. I've already bought several copies myself. They're right there in the back. Φυλακισμένος, πράκτορας. And if you don't think waterboarding isn't torture, try it. I ran into a noted writer some years ago, Christopher Hitchens, who's now passed away, who wrote about it for Vanity Fair, and he couldn't take it very long. Now, before we get to John speaking, I want to say something that you can quibble with whether he's blowing the whistle, crossed the line in terms of what his position meant, but not with his courage, because he spent 2 years in jail for that. And if you don't think that's a form of torture, try it. So please, we're going to move directly to the panel, try to cover as many bases as we can, and after each person speaks, we'll come around and you can feel free to ask questions. Sule?
Good evening. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. It is an absolute delight to come from Australia for this event. It's my second trip to Greece. I brought my teenage daughter on this trip, and she says it's her favorite foreign country she's ever visited. I'm going to have to scrape her off of Athens because she never wants to leave. So that's a wonderful thing. So I had a conversation sitting on a wonderful rooftop patio here overlooking the Acropolis the other evening with some friends. And one of them asked me, why whistleblowing? Why this anti-corruption channel? And it was a good discussion, but the explanation I gave is actually one that comes from my technology background. So increasingly, if you've seen with the Cambridge Analytica story, with the Facebook reporting story, the individual has, in a sense, less and less power dealing with powerful institutions, whether they're companies or the state. As we lose our privacy in a digital age, we have less and less power in this structure. And so power is very important to be able to have corrective mechanisms about corruption as well as general wrongdoing, not just financial corruption in society. And my own study of whistleblowing academically has really shown that it is one of the most effective tools, and a very cost-effective tool, to actually be a corrective mechanism in society to fix when there are powerful institutions or people who are doing things that are immoral or corrupt. So that really answers that sort of first question. In fact, we know there was a study done by the Association of Fraud Examiners, and they surveyed fraud examiners and found, in fact, that tips, whistleblowers, accounted for more than 40% of reporting about fraud. And that was actually more than every other major form of reporting about fraud combined. So it's actually very, very effective at revealing fraud. The other thing I think that's important about it, just to set this context, I've done a bit of research in countries, for example, in Eastern Europe, and their attitudes to whistleblowing and corruption. And one of the great things about whistleblowing is when you have mechanisms that actually work, when you have laws that work as well as implementation that works, it does actually empower people, and it gives them a sense of being able to have some control in a society that they may feel is very corrupt. And they've kind of given up hope of ever being able to get society back on track. And so that's a really important thing. It provides not just a corrective mechanism, but it gives the citizen hope. So one of the reasons I'm here tonight is to talk about two reports that Blueprint has just released, a blue report and a green report. There's some available on the back table where you can download them from the Blueprint for freespeech.net website. They're important reports because we actually studied all 28 EU countries' laws and evaluated them against 9 international standards for whether or not they meet criteria of best protection of whistleblowers. And then for the first time ever, we looked at EU countries to evaluate, is implementation of whistleblower protection actually working in practice? So no one's done that before, and that's the blue report. That's more qualitative. But what we found when we actually examined this, and if you do look at it online, because there may not be that many copies left, we actually ranked all the EU countries against these 9 standards and gave scores. So the top score was 27 points. If you got 27 points, you were a perfect score. No country in Europe got a perfect score. Some countries, such as Ireland and France and the UK, were in the top tier, and they were above 50%. That's pretty good. Greece was actually around about the middle. So it scored in the 14th place, but it only scored about 22%, so about 6 points out of 27. Now, it's good it's sort of in the middle, because you don't want it in the very bottom, but 22%, if you were a university applicant, you would not be getting into a university with 27%. You would not be passing at a university with 27%. So you'd like to actually see something a little more ambitious than that in terms of performing. And there are actually 5 categories where Greece got a 0. And one of those categories that it got a 0 is a full range of disclosure channels. And that's a little bit of what we'll be talking here tonight. So in this standard, what it says is you have an internal channel, so you blow the whistle internally about wrongdoing inside your organization. There should be a mechanism for that. Then there should be an independent agency channel. So for example, if it's about illegal environmental dumping of pollution, there should be an EPA or Environmental Protection Agency, something like this. And then the final channel is the external channel. And that might be to the media, most famously, a WikiLeaks or a mainstream media organization. It might also be to a member of parliament. It could be to a trade union. But basically, this channel is the fail-safe channel in case the other channels don't work, in case the other channels are corrupt or they don't exist at all. So this is actually an area where Greece, the analysis of our report said Greece got a 0. And that's really unfortunate, because if you don't have that channel, it doesn't create competition with the other channels to keep them honest. That's a really important thing. And we see that this is particularly true in cases that we've seen of journalists, for example, most recently, the important role they played in anti-corruption, and indeed 2 cases in Malta and Slovakia of journalists who've hit such a raw nerve reporting on corruption that they've actually been assassinated. The final thing I want to mention is around the fact that next week, the big news is the European Commission will be releasing its proposed EU directive on whistleblower protection. This is a very big deal. It's something that we at Blueprint have been working on for 2.5 years, along with lots of other NGOs and civil society groups, trying to make this happen. It has not been made public, but we have actually been able to review a copy of what will be out there. And our first pass review of it, we've only had it for a short time, is that it's very good. It's very comprehensive. It will provide that third avenue for people to go to other channels, provided they've tried internal channels first, or that no internal channels existed, or they couldn't reasonably have found them. It provides protection for whistleblowers who are revealing wrongdoing for public procurement matters, financial services, product safety, if you think about the Volkswagen case, environmental protection, nuclear safety, food safety, animal health and welfare, public health, consumer protection, protection of privacy of personal data and network security, tax breaches and unfair tax advantage, and state aid. So these are all areas that we would like to not have corruption. So I think that's kind of my little summary of this. I know I've given you a giant data dump, but hopefully that'll set context for the rest of the conversation.
Well, first, before we get to, we'll go to John next and some questions first. Excuse me, I forgot. Anna wanted to say a few words before we get to her. Would you like to say?
Yeah, okay. Just let me go a step back. Yeah, so thank you very much. We're happy to have this panel tonight. We've had quite a lot of discussions and panels so far during the last years, also in Greece, concerning whistleblowing. But tonight we're very lucky because we have an actual whistleblower in a case of international dimension, and thank you for that. And Patakis Publications, really thank you for that. So this is like the privilege of the night. But before, like what Suelet really submitted to this panel, it's all very important, it's all very current. Just let me go a step back and set a bit like also the Greek framework, because this is of interest to us tonight. Back in 2013, Transparency International published a policy paper actually asking the Greek state to adopt a law on whistleblowing. At the time, we had nothing. We had only Article 40 of the Code of Criminal Procedure saying that whoever knows a crime that's going on, every citizen that knows a crime could go to the prosecutorial authorities and submit it. But not much was happening, really. I mean, how secure can you feel with just this encouragement? I mean, no protection, actually. And we had mentioned just like 3 cases taking place at the time, 3 scandals, actually, to convince the state, thank you very much, to convince the state that, you know, we do actually need such a framework, and why do we need that? At the time, we had the Vodafone scandal, a scandal taking place primarily in the private sector, but also with like public sector implications. We also had the Ferristal submarines in the Ministry of Defense scandal with the procurement processes. And then if you also remember, we had the case with the Social Security with the ICA of Kalithea, huge scandal taking place there. What were like the similarities between those cases and the differences as well? We realized that, you know, across the 3 different scandals, not all of them took place for like economic benefit. No, Vodafone was not like that. Then there were cross-references with the public and the private sector, so corruption takes place in both sectors. Then we realized that corruption develops behind closed doors, but over a significant period of time, and with a significant circle of people, usually clean-handed even, knowing about it, that it's evolving, and nobody speaks up. And then we realized, you know, that Article 40 doesn't really help. It hadn't helped. And we proclaimed for a framework. The framework was adopted next year, like May 2014, not because of Transparency International's report, but because our lenders insisted on having a whistleblowing framework so as to tackle tax evasion and everything. So this was the primary reason, perhaps, why this framework was just like not a standalone whistleblowing framework law. It was just like some scattered provisions here and there with a very limited scope with regard to the crimes covered and with regard to the persons covered as well. I mean, I could go in detail through the rest of the flaws of the law. I mean, not enough protection for the whistleblowers, not enough security inspired by the law and feeling of safety, because, I mean, there is not like a point, where does this protection start? What are you gonna take for granted? I mean, the most important element of the whistleblowing law is like the person reads the law and feels safe, secure to go and speak up. This was not the case. Very recently, we were also, I mean, there is a discussion about like an amendment of the law, but very recently we also saw some, let's say, a trauma also of this framework. In the context of the Novartis scandal, we heard quite a few times, like we heard that there were whistleblowers involved. We don't really, I believe they're genuine whistleblowers, meaning clean-handed, but it was a shame seeing those people that really voted for the law, meaning our parliamentarians, being the first ones criticizing those figures, the whistleblowers, meaning that we heard like the musketeers or like kukulofori martyres, like this kind of characterizations, which are really traumatizing this institution that it took quite a lot of courage from the public sector and also from the civil society so as to be adopted. Luckily, recently we also had like a positive development as well. We, in the context of this scandal taking place in Malta and the dead journalist, we had the whistleblower flying over to Greece and being protected by the Greek authorities against the Maltese arrest warrant. So this is a positive in development, we could say. So let me mention also about the EU directive that draft directive that we're now waiting for, and just try to remember the LuxLeaks scandal and why there's a need for an EU-wide harmonized protection. Because, I mean, whereas Luxembourg perhaps deems those deals like tax agreements as like the sweetheart agreements, and that the whistleblowers actually violated their professional secrecy, perhaps the rest of the European countries which evaded the taxes and income because of those privileged deals, they would have an interest in the whistleblowers speaking up and being protected. So we do need a pan-European harmonized framework. And let me just finish with mentioning some psychological aspects of whistleblowing. And perhaps John could then, like, I don't know, like give us his input on that. There have been researches and there have been statistics about who becomes a whistleblower. And they're very, very revealing, perhaps even shocking. Whistleblowers, like in people that are high-ranking employees, become more easily whistleblowers. People who feel that their company is like in good financial standing become more easily, more often whistleblowers. People who belong to trade unions become easier whistleblowers, and people who feel accepted by their environment and by society. What's the bottom line of all that? It's like security environment. These people feel secure, they feel confident, they feel safe. That's why we want a good legal instrument to give this kind of feeling and this kind of protection to whistleblowers also in Greece. And this is all for me.
Okay. Seems like a good opportunity for people to jump in with questions, but I have one myself, actually. As a journalist writing about these scandals, there's so many you need a scorecard, like a playbill in the theater. And it seems like they're announced, 3 weeks later, they're forgotten. No, with very few exceptions. Nobody seems to go to jail or be prosecuted, whether it's defense contracts with notable exceptions, etc. And one of the questions I have, and I hope I don't steal anybody's thunder. Yes, ma'am?
There is an institution recently has been committed in channel of in the state channel of media Earth. We have made a council that controls Earth in many sectors like health, political issues, and many other things. And I would like to say it's very important because it could be defined, excuse me for my bad English, it could be found in many other channels. And it's about corruption. We fight so there won't be a corruption in the media.
That's a very trenchant point, and we'll address it at some point, I'm sure, because it goes to the heart of the matter. The question I have real fast is there any concern, this is for anybody on the panel, that a 3-year probe of the Nabati scandal, and now with the parliamentary committee saying it has no jurisdiction, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's a duck. What they're really saying is they have no evidence after 3 years, it seems to me. Is there any fear that crying rape without there actually being one is going to hurt the cause of legitimate whistleblowers who, if indeed it turns out that these people are hiding behind the law and that nothing happened? But please, anybody else want to jump in at this point before we move on? Yes, sir.
Thank you. I heard about the Novartis case, Vodafone case, but you didn't mention the case of Golden Dawn, that we had whistleblowers, and after some days that we heard that we have whistleblowers about this case, we heard the names of these guys that they were the whistleblowers. And I may find a connection with the case of Novartis, that after some days we heard the names of a girl that were the whistleblowers, and many political MPs said, who are the whistleblowers? And they were seeking to find the names of the whistleblowers. So what to do?
Thank you.
Do you want to take a shot?
Just confirm, I mean, nothing.
Okay. All right. Now we're going to
Can
go.
I just add one thing that I think is really important? There's a lot of debate around anonymity and whistleblowing. And in some cases, technology is running way beyond the law in this, because a number of media organizations around the world have set up anonymous, secure drop boxes, not just WikiLeaks, other organizations. And these drop boxes allow for a whistleblower to drop information in, and you will, in theory, not be able to find out who they are. In some ways, they are good, because you actually don't want to focus on the whistleblower. The whistleblower isn't the matter here. The issue here is to investigate whether the material proves wrongdoing or not. It doesn't really matter about the whistleblower. I mean, it matters how you treat them if they're known, but in a sense, they should be irrelevant to the task at hand, which is a proper independent evaluation of the accuracy of the accusation.
All right, now we'll turn it over to John. He knows the players, the politics, the landscape, the climate that creates the kind of corruption that exists here, why it is, how it feeds into each other in a kind of an internecine way. Media, business, politics, all kind of coming together in this kind of a triangle. So please, you have it.
Thanks, Andy. Contrary to what Andy told you, I was not managing director of the Lambrakis Press. I ran a newspaper within the Lambrakis Press, the Athens News, from 1999 to 2009. Since 2012, I've been working only for foreign media as a foreign correspondent. I'll give you a small example, maybe as a little bit of leavening in these heavy proceedings, of what whistleblowing can do for all of us. Before the Olympics, there was a strong argument being made by the government here that the facilities ought to be permanent, because that would leave a greater legacy after the Games. And one of the more controversial venues that was being built at the time was the Olympic Rowing Center in Marathon. There was a lot of opposition to it because of the venerability of Marathon as a sacred battleground in Greek history, and because of certain environmental issues to do with indigenous species there as well. The government's position was that in order to circumvent these concerns, that the trench, the rowing trench, was being built on a piece of the plain that did not exist in antiquity. It was subsequently created by currents. I won't mention names, but at some point, and foreign schools of archaeology had been threatened directly with non-renewal of their annual digging permits if they dared to oppose the official position. I won't mention how this happened, but the only geoarchaeological report that had taken place on the plain of Marathon landed on my desk at a very sensitive time. And we ran it on the front page. The report found that if you carried out borings on the plain of Marathon in randomly selected places, you could find what point the plain of Marathon extended to in antiquity by examining the substrata. And the report found that the plain has grown by maybe 2 or 3 yards since 490 BC, because the crustaceans found at the appropriate level, the appropriate depth for that time period, are exactly the same as those that exist now, which means organisms that thrive in the brackish water of the Marathon Plain. It was a great source of gratification to me that my publisher was extremely displeased, because it meant that we had got to somebody in the government. But those were the days when misunderstandings could go unpunished between publishers and the executive, because the relationship was extremely tight between the two. And to his credit, my publisher did not censor the paper on that occasion or ever. And we continued to embarrass him on many occasions in the subsequent years that I was editor. We were able to do that because he was himself a journalist and understood how journalism worked. There are no newspaper publishers in Greece today who are journalists. They are business people with other concerns, for whom journalism is a means to an end. That is one of the biggest problems that I think we have today in the media landscape. I was going to make this rather lighter than it is, Andy, but I can't. So in addition to improving the laws protecting those who deliver information to the media and protecting their anonymity and the media's ability to keep them anonymous, you also have to have the appropriate funding, financing, ownership structures, but also the moral underpinnings of what the media enterprise is about. It's about authenticity. It's about telling people the things that they don't know. Unless you go out in search of information that you're not sure is there, you will never discover those stories. And it's also about correcting stories that are being deliberately misreported or accidentally misreported, because misinformation and non-information are the two best ways to undermine the functioning of democracy. This is how Vladimir Putin is trying to undermine democracy. He can't directly attack it, but he can undermine it. I'll give you an example of non-information. During a certain period of time in the crisis, and I don't want to say which years, there was virtually no reporting on the banking industry in Greece, because it was simply too sensitive and too dangerous to talk about the fact that the banks were bankrupt. During the same period of time, there was no reporting on immigration, because it was convenient to some people to simply deny that we had a rising level of legal and illegal resident aliens. It was a story that was undesirable. And therefore it wasn't discussed. And the issues concerning how the country was going to be financed, the private sector was going to be financed, wasn't discussed. Financial security wasn't discussed. The issues of non-indigenous residents weren't discussed. I think these are particularly dangerous and insidious threats to how democracy functions. You simply deprive the debate of information. There's nothing to talk about. I personally see only a darkening landscape. Regardless of political hue, in these very, very difficult times for the Greek economy, I see political leadership attempting to reduce the number of television licenses, to manipulate the ownership of print media, and to try and produce media that will offer competing points of view. with points of view that the government that is in power at any given time doesn't agree. This isn't the right way to go about refuting positions that make you uncomfortable. There are better ways to counter information, to disseminate information, but I think that this is a society that hasn't yet understood the value of transparency. We instinctively tend towards less information. We instinctively believe that more revelations, more information will simply embarrass more people. And I think it's something that starts from our own culture. We didn't have an enlightenment. We missed out on some of the more important developments of Western civilization in recent centuries, but we've had 200 years to learn. And I think at this point there are no excuses. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Now you know why Joseph Pulitzer said a newspaper should have no friends. And the question I have that plays into this is, if there are fewer or controlled media outlets, there are no outlets for whistleblowers. Where can they go? Because the media is part of that conduit. And if they can't go, you very well know what happens to us when people squeeze you for telling the truth. Where do the whistleblowers go, if not to the media? Fortunately, there's social media now, so you can revert to that. So the word is going to get out. But what you said is true, of course, too. I came here from by way of the Boston Globe, where 4 of my friends won the Pulitzer Prize for reporting on the Catholic Church scandals. I wonder if that could happen here. Now, for example, the former PASOK and New Democracy owe banks 250 million euros, aren't paying. But if you owe 2,000, you're going to get a call, and your loan's been sold to Luxembourg, and they're coming after you. Where's the reporting on that? Where are the whistleblowers within the government, within the banks, people who are unafraid, and are the laws in place to protect them from speaking out if they do? Please, anyone want to have a question here of John or anybody here so far? This is I handpicked this audience to ask them tough questions. No, nobody? Okay, yeah. Well, we'll give you 2 then.
Just a short question. Why to become a whistleblower? Why to become?
Why should you become it? All right, why should you become a whistleblower? I'm sure you'll have an answer by the time we get to you. But that's a good question. You should ask within yourself, would you do it? How many of us here have not, taken a lesser price, hodí se podixi, right? And because part of the problem, as we discussed the other day, is in some way, people benefit from corruption until it gets to a level where it bleeds them. Anna, would you like to jump in again, or have you had your say?
I would like to give the floor to Tassos.
Okay, so I'm watching this guy on TV, admirer for a long time. I thought I knew a thing or two about journalism from being in the States, but boy, I learned by watching him, and I'm very, very honored to be in his presence. Tasso, please.
Thank you very much. I want to say a few words about the book we have in front of us, Doing Time Like a Spy. One of the first questions I wanted to pose to John, and I think I asked him, was if he liked his time in the CIA. And this is a question that comes in both books. The first one, The Reluctant Spy, and this one. It comes often, and both books, I think, give a positive answer. Yes, his time with the CIA was worth spending. But this book is a peculiar one. Is how to learn spending worthy time in a prison. And Kiriakou loves to learn. With his rather sophisticated, naive standing, it's naive in the first glance, but it's a sophisticated naivety. He absorbs and processes the news. He analyzes characters with great accuracy. And he also chooses persons around him he could learn from. And he does this even in the prison. This is something which is very worthy. I think it's the most important reason to read this book. This book is a great reading about human characters in prison, where a decent person like John succeeds in surviving and learning based on the solid fundament of what he had probably perfectionized as a spy, which is a paradox. I mean, without the spy career, it would have been very difficult to survive in the prison. Now to the whistleblower issue, which is another paradox. And in Greece is twice paradoxical as it is in other countries. As you may know, and as Anna said before, the Greek Republic has changed its law in protecting whistleblowers, or especially for the harm of public service, with the Article 45B of the Penal Code that has been established back in the year 2014. I want to say a few things about the background. I have been present in both reviews of the OECD in 2012 and 2014. And I have felt the pressure from the OECD on our anti-corruption judges and on our political responsibles to change the law and implement a kind of protection. It was the time when the late Mr. Bakouris and Anna were fighting to get this legislation done. This anti-corruption clause, that whistleblower protection clause that has been brought in, was a kind of a compromising formula. There was really nothing about the private sector, where all the other countries have started from. I can remember, especially on the second review, where Mr. Athanasiou was the then Justice Minister, with a great curiosity, confronting a lot of my fellow reporters that were trying to persuade the OECD that Greek companies do not take part in corruption operations outside the country. We were talking just about foreign companies. At this time, already some steps have been implemented in the direction of the protection of people that cooperated with the state prosecutors. There was the Kastanidis reform back in the year 2010-2011, when somebody contributing things that were unknown to the prosecutors could get a lighter sentence. And this was the case of the relative of Mr. Tsohatzopoulou Ziras that contributed to the prosecution of the then the ex-minister of defense. He was accused of taking bribes for defense material procurement. But generally speaking, whistleblowers within the framework of Greek culture are considered as rats. And this is the main philosophical problem. Loyalty in a highly personalized private economy, where the main shareholder uses to be the CEO of the company also, is a good that isn't to put into risk here more than in other places. As the first speaker has said, next Wednesday the European Commission is going to publish its draft directive for the protection of whistleblowers all over Europe. And this will force the Greek government to change its law. And there where the whole thing will start from the beginning. What are the differences between the draft I have seen, because I have seen also the draft, and the Greek law? First of all, the European draft touches, as the first speaker said, nearly all of the matters a whistleblower could come up with information. Secondly, the whistleblower can be everybody, from the CEO of the company to somebody who is having, or she's having her practice in the company just for 6 months, an unpaid practice. A contractor can be a whistleblower. Everybody can be a whistleblower. So an interesting thing is how the Greek parliament is going to adjust this legislation in Greece. We will experience some interesting times. There were some questions about, from the gentleman on the second row, on how whistleblowers are protected. I don't want to get into politics about Novartis, but I will tell you one small thing that was interesting to me. As you may know, the public prosecutor has sent to the parliament some of the documents that were passed to her from the protected witnesses in the Novartis case. If you have gone on with your censor on these documents, on the properties, you would have discovered who has written these papers. So what kind of protection is that? I mean, protection is a whole thing of measures. And as we speak about protection, most of you may not know that the first whistleblowers to be protected in the Greek law order were the ones that were bringing information about terrorist groups or closed groups. In this first law, there was a provision that a presidential decree had to be published for the so-called identity change. You can't protect a whistleblower if you don't give him or her the opportunity to change the identity, to change the identity card, to change the place he or she lives. This presidential decree has not yet been published after 16 years. 17, yes. So, as we speak about this protection of whistleblowers, we must keep in mind that the Greek arsenal of measures in protecting the whistleblowers is still a torso that needs to be fulfilled with a lot of measures, technical measures, technological measures, and others to have a very basic protection of the whistleblowers. One thing that we have to push for sure is to extend that protection also for informants from the private sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tasso. One question I would have as a journalist is, are your sources still willing to speak with you? Are they drying up? Do you feel in this current atmosphere, because according to the current government, there's been no corruption for the last 3 years, are people still willing to talk to you, or do they feel reluctant the way things are these days?
No, the people talk to us, and they talk if you prove, because you have to prove it every day, that you are keeping the basics of this profession, which is save their identity, try to make data as little as possible from what they tell you, and try to contact them through the normal way. Two people talk about matters that have not been revealed to thirds. That means not on the phone or on the computer.
And John, if you were managing editor of a newspaper in Greece, a major newspaper, people came to you with the same kind of report you were talking about in a different matter, I know you do it at any cost. would you be squeezed by interests that were not journalistic? One thing I've discovered from working in newspapers is if a publisher could print only ads, they would do it. The only reason they have newspaper reporting staff is to get people to read the ads.
I think there's always a balance. Newspapers are also businesses and they have to survive within the economy that they report upon. And they have to be credible to their readership. And those two goals are often in contradiction. One recent publisher tried to relaunch a defunct newspaper on the basis that it would not accept advertising from any state agencies or banks, which was, I think, a reasonably good moral position. But the market being what it is, it couldn't survive on the basis of subscriptions and buyers alone. And this is one of the big problems that the media face. There's been a huge defunding of the media, which is why we've seen so many sell-offs of historic newspapers, both in the States and in Europe. And the buyers are not always people who are committed to serving the public. So I think the internet has done certain things for us, for transparency. Blogs, self-publishing, WikiLeaks, YouTube. There's a whole different universe of means of expression out there. But it's destroyed the old publishing model, and that still hasn't been fixed. And the truth is this, as anyone who looks at videos on YouTube will quickly discover, there is not an undiscovered pool of fantastic talent out there. A group of bloggers does not replace a coordinated and well-managed newspaper and well-funded newspaper. The Boston Globe had to pay those 4 investigative reporters very well to produce nothing for 2 years before they came up with the Catholic Church expose. That is what is now missing, coordination and funding. The internet model is a bit of a, I don't want to say doron avaron, as we say in Greece. It's given us things, but it's taken away a lot that people have forgotten about.
Anybody? Yes, sir. Please, can you pass this down?
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Vasilis Stamatopoulos. I'm the co-founder of a small young enterprise which is called the Frontline. Our main services is whistleblowing and personal data, so we're quite sensitive to both of those issues. I don't know if you know that in the beginning of March, the Σώμα Επιθεωρητών Ελεγκτών Δημόσιας Διοίκησης, the internal, let's say, body of controllers of the public sector, that their whistleblowing system was compromised. So a few thousands of whistleblowers, their data was in the public domain. So everybody could see it. Somebody Googled their name and saw that he had reported somebody else. I believe this took us years back because there is no security. If you see the main whistleblowing platforms of the public sector, it's just not even secure HTTP. No security, no technological security whatsoever. And they are still, using those systems. There has been no resignation because of this, let's say, small problem. And nobody knows why this happened. And in what sense can we encourage people to go out and just blow the whistle since they know that they're not protected at all? So sometimes we overheat the situation, we encourage people to go out, but I believe the security is not there. Thank you.
Well, Soledad, is there a chilling effect? In the last few years, a couple of members of SecureDrop have died as well.
So a couple of key things. The first thing I'd say is I know from my own research of public polling, gold standard public polling across almost 10 countries, that in fact the public would rather go to a journalist than they would go to social media to report wrongdoing. This is very important because your comments about the media dissipating and being sort of decimated by the changed economic model means there are fewer options. I train journalists in data security to protect them and their sources, particularly their whistleblower sources. It's actually somewhat difficult to do to a high standard, certainly to an intelligence agency standard. And increasingly journalists are aware of it, but actually a surprising number still don't realize that they have a moral obligation to the whistleblower that goes beyond just taking their data. They actually have to protect their data as well. And that's kind of an emerging field, but it's hard. And we've had cases in Australia of whistleblowers, and indeed of the US, of whistleblowers who've been identified through basically technological means. And then, people are often running to actually be engaged in reprisal against them for their whistleblowing.
Well, in the States, newspapers have a lot of leverage. There's a saying there that people don't want to tangle with them because they don't want to get into a fight with somebody who buys ink by the barrel. Digital media is changing that now to a small example, not at this level. Some years ago, I did a story about a young man who died in a fire. There was no smoke alarm, and the windows were barred in violation of law. And I had a very good source in the public safety department, and I was subpoenaed by the attorney for the management company. Turned out it was a Greek-American lawyer. I had a few choice words for her. And she said, I want to know the name of your source. Well, John, you know where this is going. I said, his name is Gopoundsandy, Gopoundsandopoulos. Okay. We're not telling you. She said, well, then we'll go to court. I said, fine, that's fine with me, because we'll have a story every day for some weeks with your manager's name in there, and I can't promise that my friends from AP, Bloomberg, Reuters, UPI, et cetera, won't be there. They settled. Dino?
I'd like to tone that my friend Amy said, to use some humor, weighty issues need some leavening.
You have to read it the way I wrote it for you to say it.
I don't know if this phrase will translate into Greek, but I'm going to say something. I don't know how this phrase translates into Greek, but I will say something that will be like the proverbial fart in a perfume factory. First, I will say that this is an incredible panel that you put together, Andy. And I want to congratulate you and thank you from here right now. I also want to say it is an absolutely vital issue. It is vital to the survival of democracy. It is vital to the well-being of our societies because, you've touched upon it, corruption also distorts the economic and commercial decision-making that's supposed to lead to prosperity and economic security in our countries and societies. That said, I wonder if you might comment on what I think legitimate a critic might say, given what you've all touched upon, about how easy it is for misinformation or lack of information to be manipulated by forces within societies from outside, and we can talk about Russia and Putin. But I imagine somebody might say, these laws could be manipulated by people like that so that people could be planted to create chaos where there isn't corruption and undermine societies. So how can we protect against such laws, which I will say should be as powerful as possible and protect whistleblowers as much as possible? What are the thoughts about making sure that they're not also manipulated and exploited?
I'd like to have him after you with some questions if you had done something wrong. Did somebody else raise a hand, did I say, please? Yes, sir.
Thank you. I am a Major Retired Dathan Cosmopoulos, Intelligence and Armed Forces. I would like to ask Mr. Kiriakou something about the journalism. Up to recent years, journalists were mainly paid for their reporting and writing, for things they knew and they reported. Nowadays, I have the impression that many journalists are paid for things they know, but they're not reporting or writing. and they keep them in safe deposit boxes in banks or elsewhere. I would like your comment on that, if this is a correct impression or it's not the case here. Thank you very much.
Sounds like your field.
I don't think journalists report now less than they used to report previously. They always, there is an old journalistic joke that when you are young, you don't know anything to report. And when you become older, you know everything, but you don't report. So, but this is partially true. There are three main difficulties. One difficulty is you need resources to follow up a story that may last for months, may last for years. And these resources are not available now. This is the one thing. When we did with some colleagues, when we worked with some colleagues back in the year 2008, 2009 on the Siemens case, we need to travel very often to other places and then study papers overnights and cross-check wire transfers among various banks, and the result of our work didn't appear. So for our newsroom, we knew that we worked, but they didn't know that we worked. So this is always a problem in Greece. It used to be a problem also prior to the crisis. It's not just today a problem. The other thing, so the first thing is lack of resources. The other thing is these big investigative works are teamwork. So you need to build up a team. You don't do it by yourself. You're not a lonely artist. And there are two problems here. The newsrooms don't like teams in Greece because of we have this mentality. And the other thing is if you put up teams for a specific work, you have to pull them out of other work. And then you get back to the problem number one of resources. So they don't do anything else, or if they do something else, they have to do both, which is a problem. And there is a third thing, which has to do with specific areas of social activity. And these areas of social activity are not just a Greek phenomenon, but it's also a European phenomenon, like banks. There was a reluctance in reporting on the banks. But it was not just a reluctance on reporting on our side, but it was a reluctance of reporting also of state authorities on banks for other reasons. You don't touch the fountain where you get some drops of the water you need to survive. I'll put it in that way. But this used to become a problem because, for example, some banks became the sole advertisers in the Greek landscape. For example, the Piraeus Bank. It became more dominant on the content that we loved too. And this caused serious problems also in the content for some time. This is not only a Greek problem. It's if you read the Spanish press, it's exactly the same in Spain and in other places where they had a credit crunch. So I think these are the three answers to your question.
And
Before we go to the cleanup hitter, anybody else?
If I may add to what Tassos...
Excuse me, John, please go ahead.
If I may add to what Tassos said, I remember distinctly, Tasso, for a number of years, before even the financial crisis, the only advertising that newspapers could really count on for the kind of money that major news organizations need were state agencies, banks, and telecommunications. Everybody else pretty much had been reduced to very small advertising budgets. And the state agencies were particularly tricky because do you remember when the Karamanlis government created the tourism ministry? with a 70 million euro budget for advertising. That was the first advertising budget for the tourism ministry. And we thought, fantastic, this will do amazing things for Greek tourism once you spend that money overseas. And lo and behold, in 2005, we started seeing the tourism ministry taking out full-page ads in all the Greek newspapers because the government was playing its old game of keeping its hand in. All right, I'll stop now.
Hi there, congrats on the panel. I've heard things that are interesting. I've heard things that I agree with, some others that I vehemently disagree with. But to sum it up, the new directive, or rather a proposal for a directive, is coming. We've seen our fair share of directives come to Greece and get transposed. I've done my fair share of transposing as well. So the issue is whether this is an all-encompassing omnibus legislation or whether it is more targeted. Number one, how will this work, given that the EU seems not to follow up on the qualitative issues? So what they would actually do is send a claim to the ministry, and they will say, how have you transposed the directive? We send them back our provisions, their legal departments tick boxes, and they send it back. They will never follow up. Also, I've noticed that it's a bit of an absurdity for Europe to say that anti-corruption is at the forefront of its attempts, given that, and everybody can check this, if you check the budget, the money given for training on corruption is less than money given for training on fisheries. The last issue, how do you think that we can tackle the reverse effect, over-filing of complaints in such cases? Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to swing for the fences. Everybody wants to know, how many mobsters did you meet in prison?
Lots.
Please, the floor is yours.
And I liked almost every one of them. First of all, thank you for coming tonight. Everybody here, thank you to Elena Pataki for this incredible, it's so much more beautiful than the American version is. I can't even believe it. Thank you also to Mr. Nikoloudis, the former Minister of Justice, who is here. I'm so honored to see him and to have him here. I have a very long story that I'm going to make very short. But I want to talk about national security whistleblowing and how I came to the decision to blow the whistle on the CIA's torture program. Believe me when I tell you that 10 years ago, I never, ever would have pictured myself in this position. Recently released from prison, of all things. I was the good kid in my family. It was my brother that was the bad one. Now my brother's a millionaire record producer and I'm a convicted felon. So you never really know how things are going to work out. But anyway, after the September 11th attacks, I was sent to Pakistan as the director of counterterrorism operations for the CIA. It was a big job. And so I had been there for about 6 weeks, and we received word that Abu Zubaydah, who we believed at the time was the number 3 in Al-Qaeda, was somewhere in Pakistan, and that I had to catch him. I had to take him alive, was what they told me specifically. Pakistan is the size of Texas, and it has 200 million people in it. So to say he's somewhere in Pakistan, you have to catch him. It's not possible. So I came up with a couple of ideas that were terrible. They didn't even come close to working, and I asked for an analyst to come out to help me pour through the data. This analyst came out, and 3 weeks later said that he was able to locate, or to narrow at least, Abu Zubaydah's location to 14 different sites. He might be, maybe, in one of these 14 different sites. We had never hit more than 2 sites before in a single night. So we asked for a bigger team, half CIA, half FBI. We had the Pakistani military there to help us. And we did 14 simultaneous raids at 2 o'clock in the morning on March the 22nd, 2002. He was in the final site. I know, I couldn't believe it either. One of my colleagues asked me, do you think we'll catch him? And I said, no. I think we'll catch somebody, but I don't think we're going to catch him. And there he was. He tried to escape by climbing to the roof of his house and jumping to the roof of the next house. There was a Pakistani policeman on the ground, and he was shooting everybody who was jumping. He shot Abu Zubaydah in the thigh, the groin, and the stomach, and he dropped to the ground, almost dead. I thought he was dead. So I went to him, and I said, this doesn't look anything like Abu Zubaydah. I didn't recognize the man at all. He was nothing like the one 6-year-old passport picture we had. So the analyst told me to take a picture of his eye so we can run a retinal scan. But his eyes were rolled back into his head. And I said, he's dying, he's bleeding to death. What else can I do? He said, take a picture of his ear. Well, I didn't know until that night that no two people on earth have the same ears. They're like fingerprints. So I took a picture of his ear. I sent it to headquarters. They said, it's him. So we rushed him to a hospital, terrible place. But word got around the Al-Qaeda community that we had captured him. And so they began driving by the hospital and just opening fire on the hospital. So I said to the Pakistani I was with, if they realize we're unarmed, we're dead. Can you get a helicopter to land here? He said yes. The helicopter landed about 20 minutes later. I went into the emergency room to the surgery room, and I told the doctor, let's go, wrap it up. We have to take him. So we put him on the helicopter. We flew to a military base about 50, 60 kilometers away. George Tenet was the director of the CIA at the time, and he sent word. His exact words were 24/7 CIA eyes on. Do not leave his bedside, he told me. I was already awake for, 28 hours, something like that. And I was afraid I would fall asleep and he would run away, or the doctor was Al-Qaeda and he's going to kidnap him. I didn't know. So I tore up a sheet and I tied him to the bed. He had an oxygen mask on and he was tied to the bed. He remained in this coma about 24 hours and then finally woke up 24 hours later. When he came to, he motioned for me to come next to his bed. So I went and I moved his oxygen mask and I said to him in Arabic, Shu ismek, what is your name? And he shook his head. So I said it again, Shu ismek. And he said to me in English, I will not speak to you in God's language. I said, that's okay, Abu Zubaydah, we know who you are. And he started crying and he said, please, brother, kill me. Take the pillow and kill me. And I said, nobody's going to kill you. We've been looking for you for a long time. And I said, but I'm going to give you some advice because I am the nicest guy that you're going to meet in this experience. My colleagues, they're not as nice as I am. So if there's one thing that you do, it's that you have to cooperate. And he said to me, you seem like a nice man, but you're the enemy. And I'll never cooperate. I said, well, suit yourself. Over the next 24 hours, we talked a lot. He cried a lot. He would never know the touch of a woman. He would never know the joy of fatherhood. I said, you're not the victim here. There were 50,000 people in those towers. What did you think we were going to do? Did you think we wouldn't try to kill you or to kill bin Laden? You're not the victim. And remember, I said, your life is over, but the rest of it can be easy or it can be terrible. It's up to you, and you have to cooperate. About 4 hours later, a CIA jet flew into the base, and 3 FBI agents and I carried him out to the plane. He asked me to hold his hand. He was crying. We took him on the plane. We tied him to the luggage rack at the back of the plane. And I said to him, good luck. And remember, you have to cooperate. About 3 weeks later, I flew back to CIA headquarters. And I had been there about 3 days. I was in the cafeteria getting lunch one day, and a senior officer from the CIA's Counterterrorism Center stopped me. And very casually, he said, "Oh, I'm glad I ran into you. Do you want to be certified in the use of enhanced interrogation techniques?" I had never heard that term before. I said, "What does that mean?" And very excitedly, he said, "We're going to get rough with these guys." And I said, "Well, what does rough mean?" And so he told me a list of 10 torture techniques that were going to be used against Abu Zubaydah and other al-Qaeda prisoners. And I said, oh, that sounds like a torture program. Torture is illegal. And he said, "No, the White House said we can do it." And I said, "I don't think so." I said, "I have a moral and ethical problem with this. I don't want to be involved." I'm sorry to tell you that of the 14 people that they asked, I was the only one who said no. The only one. And then on August 1st, 2002, the CIA began to torture Abu Zubaydah. They began by waterboarding him, not once, but 83 times. 83 times they did it, and not once did he provide any information that saved American lives or disrupted a terrorist attack. Why? Because he was the wrong guy. There was a cousin also named Abu Zubaydah who was actually the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. And we had caught the wrong man. Well, you can't tell George W. Bush and George Tenet and Donald Rumsfeld and all of these other senior people, "We made a mistake. We caught the wrong man." That's not what they wanted to hear. They wanted to hear that we are disrupting Al-Qaeda, we're collecting information, and we're killing them when we can't catch them. Abu Zubaydah eventually was moved to Guantanamo. He is still in Guantanamo. He has been in our custody now for almost, actually it's a little bit more than 16 years. He's never been charged with a crime. And it was because he was tortured relentlessly. It wasn't just the waterboarding. We learned, for example, that he had a terrible fear of insects, of bugs. And so they put him in a coffin, right? And not just for a few hours. They put him in a coffin for 3 weeks. And they put insects in the coffin just to make him crazy. They stripped him naked and chained him to a bolt in the ceiling so that he could not sit down, lay down, get comfortable in any way. They chilled his cell to 10 degrees Celsius. And then every hour they threw a bucket of ice water on him. Now, we killed 2 people doing that. You don't read about it in the newspapers, but we killed people. Well, the Justice Department never said we could murder people while we were interrogating them, but we did. Nobody was ever prosecuted. Well, he was sent from secret prison to secret prison, and each one that he went to was worse than the one before. I was in headquarters and I was reading the reports that they were sending back saying we did this to him and he didn't say anything, and then we waterboarded him and he didn't say anything, and then we blasted him with light and with loud music for 7 days and he didn't say anything, and then we kept him awake for 9 days, for 12 days, which usually leads to death, by the way, and he never said anything. Well, I left the CIA in 2004. And I'm ashamed to tell you that I kept my mouth shut. I didn't say anything because I kept waiting for somebody else to say something. I wasn't in the secret prison. I didn't actually see the torture. I had read each of the reports, so I knew what they were doing. But I kept waiting for someone who was actually there to say something. And nobody ever said anything. So I left the CIA in 2004. I kept my mouth shut until December of 2007. Finally, in 2007, a reporter called me and said that he had a source who said that I had tortured Abu Zubaydah. I said that was absolutely untrue. I said I was kind to Abu Zubaydah. I was the only one who was kind to Abu Zubaydah. I never laid a hand on him or on any other prisoner. I said, your source is either mistaken or he's a liar. Well, he says, you're welcome to come on the show and defend yourself. An old reporter's trick, I'm told. I had never met a reporter before. What did I know? I said, I'll think about it. The next thing I know, President Bush is giving a news conference, and he looks directly into the camera and he says, we do not torture. And I said to my wife, who was also a senior CIA officer, I said, he is a bald-faced liar. He is looking the American people in the eye, and he's lying to us. And then a couple of days later, a reporter shouted a question at him. And he said, well, if there is torture, it's the result of a rogue CIA officer. And I said to my wife, Brian Ross's source is in the White House, and they're going to pin this on me. I said, it's time for the truth to come out. So I called the reporter and I said, I'll give you your interview. And I decided in the days leading up to that interview that whatever he asked me, I was going to tell the truth. And so I did. I said 3 things that changed the course of the rest of my life. I said the CIA was torturing its prisoners. I said that torture was official U.S. government policy. It was not the result of a rogue. And I said that the policy had been personally approved by the president himself. Within 24 hours, as you can imagine, the FBI began investigating me. They investigated me for 1 year, from December of 2007 until December of 2008. But in December 2008, they decided that I had not committed a crime, and they closed the case. It was the happiest day of my life. What I did not know was that 3 weeks later, when Barack Obama became president, the CIA asked him to secretly reopen the case against me. For the next 3 years, I had no idea that the FBI was listening to my phone calls, they were reading my emails, and they had 4 different surveillance teams following me. This was a cost to the American taxpayer of more than $4 million. $4 million just to follow me and listen to my phone calls. In January 2012, I was arrested, and I was charged with 5 counts of espionage coming out of that interview. Espionage. It's a death penalty charge in the United States. Death penalty for talking to ABC News and the New York Times. I had never really heard the word whistleblowing before. And so I noticed in the Washington Post there was a woman quoted, an attorney quoted, and she was very supportive of me. And so I called her one morning very early. It was 6 o'clock in the morning, but she was at the office, and she answered my call. And I said, I'm John Kiriakou. Oh my gosh, please come into the office, she says. So I go into the office. We talked, and she agreed to represent me for free. Never mind that I later spent $1.1 million on attorneys. That's a whole different story. But when I was leaving her office, I said to her, thank you for taking my case because I know that you represent whistleblowers, and I'm not a whistleblower. And she said, but you are a whistleblower. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm just somebody who just said something. And she said, look, this is a theme among all whistleblowers. No whistleblower thinks he's a whistleblower. None of them do. You don't wake up one morning and say, today I will be a whistleblower. That's just not the way it works out. There's a legal definition of whistleblowing. It is bringing to light any evidence of waste, fraud, abuse, illegality, or threats to the public health or public safety. Why you did it, why you went to the press, is irrelevant. All that matters is that you did it. In the US, the justice system is such that you really don't have a chance. There's an old joke that an American jury would convict a bologna sandwich and send it to prison. And indeed, the American government wins 98.2% of its cases because what they do is, let's see, maybe you did break a law, one law. They'll charge you with 5, 10, 20 felonies, 20 different criminal charges, and they'll wait until you go bankrupt. And then they'll come and say, okay, listen, we'll dismiss all the charges but one if you plead guilty. Well, even if you're innocent, you'll plead guilty because you've already spent $1 million on lawyers that you can never pay back. All of your friends have left you. Many of your family members have left you. Many whistleblowers lose their spouses because they just can't take the pressure. And if you're found guilty in a trial, at least in a case like mine, I was looking at 45 years in prison. That's a death sentence. I'm 53 years old. I can't spend 45 years in prison. But the government is offering me 2.5, in which case I would be out in 2. I have 5 children at home. So what do? I wanted to see my children grow up. I wanted to see my daughter get married and meet my grandchildren. So I took the plea, just like everybody takes the plea. But I believed in what I did. People ask me all the time if I would do it again, and that's a very easy question. The answer is definitely yes. Because one of the things I learned at the CIA was the CIA tries to teach you, they try to convey in their culture that everything in life is a shade of gray. But that's just not true. Some things are right and wrong. They're black and white. And this was something that was just plain wrong. Let me tell you another thing, too. In 1946, the American government executed Japanese soldiers who had waterboarded American prisoners of war. Executed them. It was a death penalty charge to waterboard someone. In 1968, the Washington Post ran a front page picture of an American soldier waterboarding a North Vietnamese prisoner. On the day that that picture was published, the Secretary of Defense ordered an investigation. The soldier was arrested, charged with torture, convicted, and sent to a military prison for 20 years. Well, the law never changed. We changed. So why was waterboarding illegal in 1946 and illegal in 1968, but it was perfectly legal in 2002? It's because we changed, and we wanted to convince ourselves that we could do anything we wanted and there was no price to pay. That is wrong. There has to be accountability. And so I decided that if nobody's going to say something, then I will. The price was very high, but it was worth it. And you know, one thing that sticks in my mind, I was telling a couple of people here, well, not here, but earlier today, that when you're a patriot, a law-abiding citizen, you dedicate your life to public service, and then you're accused of, essentially, of treason, really is what it came down to. Espionage, I mean, that's spying for a foreign government is what it, at least that's what it ought to be. All that goes through your mind is, I have to kill myself. There's nothing else I can do. If I don't kill myself, I'll be in prison for the rest of my life and I'll die in there. And it takes friends and family to say, no, you have to fight it. You have to fight. You have to push forward. You can't kill yourself. I asked my doctor, I was telling somebody earlier today, I couldn't sleep after I was arrested. I was sleeping 1 hour, 2 hours a night. I said to the doctor, I need some sleeping pills. And he said, no, I'm not going to give you any sleeping pills. I said, look, I promise I won't kill myself. He said, tell me as a man. He said, man to man, tell me, promise me. I said, I promise as a man I won't kill myself. And he gave me the pills, so at least I got a decent night's sleep. But this is what the government wants you to do. The point isn't just to prosecute you. One of my attorneys told me this very early on. He said, this case isn't about you. You think it is, but it's not. This case is much bigger than you. This case is about honesty and transparency and openness in government. They don't care about you. He said eventually they're going to offer you a deal, which I didn't know at the time. What this is they want to make sure that everybody else in government who's thinking of blowing the whistle says, look what they did to John Kiriakou. I better keep my mouth shut. That's what they're banking on. But then I was in prison for about 6 months. I was reading a copy of the New York Times, and it was an interview with Edward Snowden. And in the interview, he said that Thomas Drake, an NSA whistleblower, and John Kiriakou inspired him to go public and to leak his information to WikiLeaks. And I thought, God bless Ed Snowden. At least I had an impact on somebody. Because without Edward Snowden, we would have no idea that the American government was spying on Americans, which of course is illegal. NSA is not allowed to spy on Americans. It's even part of the NSA charter that they're not allowed to spy on Americans, and they do. And they were getting away with it until Edward Snowden told us. When I got out of prison, I should say just 2 weeks before I got out of prison, the Senate torture report was released. I called my wife that evening. I was allowed to call my family every other day for 15 minutes. So I called and I said, "How was your day?" She said, "It was great." I said, "Yeah, why?" And she said, "Because today the Senate torture report was released and it proved that everything you said was true." And I thought, yeah, it was worth it. I got home February 3rd, 2015. And in the summer of 2015, Congress passed something called the McCain-Feinstein Amendment. The McCain-Feinstein Amendment permanently banned exactly those torture techniques that the CIA was using against Abu Zubaydah and other al-Qaeda prisoners. And after the president signed it into law, ironically, it was Barack Obama signed it into law, John McCain, who was the primary author, gave an interview and said that if John Kiriakou had not said anything, if he hadn't told us that this was happening, this bill would never have become law, and we would still be torturing people, and no one would know about it. That also made it all worth it. So the price was high, certainly. It was very high. I'll never really work again. I mean, not really. I had a fantastic corporate job. I was one of the senior-most officers on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I was a news commentator. But my name is mud now in many circles. But I don't care. It was worth it. I know that I was right. A couple of days before I left for prison, the deputy director of the CIA tweeted at me. He knew I was leaving for prison soon, and he said, and I hope that you understand the colloquialism, he said, "Don't drop the soap, asshole." This is what the deputy director of the CIA, this is the language he used with me. "Don't drop the soap, asshole." And I gave myself an hour to calm down and take it easy, and I tweeted back at him. And I said, "Jose, I am on the right side of history, and you are not." And that's the truth. Now there are arrest warrants for him in every European Union country. And I'm in beautiful Athens, sitting with my friends. Again, it was worth it. I get a lot of emails now and phone calls from whistleblowers or from people who are considering blowing the whistle. And I tell them, do it. Don't necessarily do it the way I did it. I just did it, just like that. Talk to an attorney first. Protect your rights. If you're lucky, you can protect your identity. But do it, because without whistleblowers, all we have is chaos. Thank you again for taking the time to listen to me very much. Thank you. Thanks
a lot. Wow, I mean, wow. I have a new standard for decency and bravery in my life. You're a braver man than I, Gungadin, I'll tell you that.
Or I'm a very stupid man, which is my wife's position.
No, you prove that what Popeye said is true, that's what right is right and what's wrong is wrong, even if it helps you. Since my knees are shaking and I have to sit down, who would like to ask the first question? Because I've got about 200 of them, so I'm going to put them aside. Anybody willing to go to prison to reveal what's going on here in Greece? Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Kousulos Ioannis, the president of Hellenic Anti-Corruption Organization, attorney at law, and the first ever who took an assignment for his client, recognized him as a whistleblower in Greece. I can say that unfortunately here in Greece, we are governed by fear. But what Mr. Kiriakou said is true, and we are taking this lead, this way, to reveal the truth, because all Greek citizens face cause of this fear. We have also deposited a draft law for whistleblower protection to the Ministry of Justice, and you can find many information on our LinkedIn webpage as a Hellenic Anti-Corruption Organization, and we want your comments. Also, I want to thank personally Dr. Dreyfus, hospitals in his report, in Blueprint report, and we are hoping to have a further cooperation. Also, I want to address, I want to say a last thing. Here in this panel, I didn't, nobody said that whistleblowing derives from the Greek word parrhesia. And also, nobody said that for whistleblowing here in Greece, we have the UNCAC, the United Nations Conventions Against Corruption, from 2008, which gives us the tools for the concrete protection for whistleblowers. But we are speaking for, according to my opinion, a law that is a damaged law of 2014 for the protection of whistleblowers. So we must take all a stand and make the difference, not only for the whistleblowers, but also for Greek citizens, because that will reveal the truth. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's valuable information I did not know. Please, anyone, I'm curious as to why there's nobody wants to know more about what happened with John's story, because apart from wanting to know who your favorite character on Homeland is, yeah.
Thank you for sharing your story with us. I would like to ask you, were there any internal channels that were, let's say, encouraging?
Good question.
Yes, would you, going back in time, would you prefer to start first internally? Because this is a common issue, people some people tend to go directly to the press. In theory, this is not correct. You should first try if there are internal channels, and then you should exhaust all possibilities, because even in a corporate environment, just disclosing corporate secrets can give the opportunity to the company to go against you, legally.
Yes, you're exactly right. That's a very important issue. In my case, I couldn't go through official channels. Now, what they teach you in the intelligence community is, of course, you go through official channels. You go to your supervisor if you don't get satisfaction, to the inspector general, to the general counsel, and then ultimately to the congressional oversight committees on Capitol Hill, the Senate and House intelligence committees. My problem was that my chain of command created the torture program, and the congressional oversight committees approved the program in secret. So for me, my situation was unusual, and so I could only go to the press. There's another case, too, that gives those of us in the intelligence community pause. That was the case of Tom Drake, the NSA whistleblower. So Tom Drake found that the NSA had replaced a $100 million interception program with a $6 billion interception program that actually did less to protect American citizens. And it was because they were all getting paid. So he went to his supervisor. The supervisor told him to close his mouth. He went to the inspector general who knew nothing because the inspector general was not cleared for the information. He went to the general counsel and then to the Defense Department inspector general. The Defense Department inspector general actually destroyed the evidence that he brought out with him. And then so he went to the House Intelligence Committee, which is exactly what you're supposed to do. And so what did they do? They charged him with 9 counts of espionage. And they told him that if he pled guilty, that they would not ask for the death penalty. Well, he hadn't committed espionage. He did it exactly the way that you're supposed to do it. And eventually the entire case fell apart, and he was never convicted of a crime. But not until his wife left him and took their 5 children, because she also worked at NSA. Not until he spent his entire pension on lawyers. He was ruined. They took his security clearance. They took his house. He lost literally everything in his life. And here we are all these years later. Now, this is 7 years later, and he works at the Apple store. This was the number 4 ranking man in NSA, and he works at the Apple store. So normally I would say yes. For 90% of whistleblowers, they should go through the chain of command. If they cannot reveal their identity and they're working in government, and I can't, but 5 years ago I would have said you were crazy if you said that I was going to say this, but I would go to WikiLeaks. I really would. At least you know WikiLeaks is going to preserve your identity, your anonymity. It's really the only place to go. We see now in the United States people going to the press. Reality Winner, an officer who went to The Intercept. There was an FBI agent a week ago who went to The Intercept, and The Intercept was very careless with their identities, and now they're both under arrest. Reality Winner is being held without bail. She's been in prison since June of last year, and this FBI agent has been in prison for the last 2 weeks and has pled guilty to espionage. He didn't commit espionage. All he said was to The Intercept, I found evidence of fraud at the FBI. They said espionage. So he hasn't been sentenced yet, but he's looking at as much as 10 years in prison. So yeah, if you're going to go to the press, get a lawyer first. If you're not going to get a lawyer, go through your chain of command.
Just to add to John's experience, I mean, it's not so rare anymore. This was exactly the case with the murder of the Maltese journalist. Yes. Just to give you a bit of input in that story. I mean, there is this Pilatus bank in Malta. Efimova was an employee of that bank. She realized that money laundering was going on in the bank, and the person responsible for that, like, it was like the very same, the owner of the bank. So there were no internal channels for whistleblowing, apparently. Then, I mean, she could go to the supervisory authorities of Malta. But what was the case there? The anti-money laundering authority of Malta had jumped in the bank in the past, and they found nothing or they took no action. The same also with the Central Bank of Malta. Could she have gone to the European Central Bank? I mean, which is supposedly a much more credible institution than perhaps the local authorities. She could if, for example, this was like in the old times. But money laundering, particularly in the European new supervisory system, I mean, just belongs to the national authorities, to the central bank. So apparently for money laundering issues, the European Central Bank has no competence. And to add to that, Pilatus Bank was a non-significant, a less significant bank. So by definition, it was fully supervised by the national authorities, which apparently were unwilling to take any action. This is why Efimova, the employee of Pilatus Bank, felt like she needed to talk to journalists, and then for this reason she talked to Galicia, and this is where we ended up. And Efimova had to fly to Athens, and the Greek judicial authorities denied twice the extradition to Malta, yes, despite the 2 arrest warrants by the Maltese authorities.
Just one addition. Efimova was not employed officially by the bank. She was making her practice in the bank. That means under the new legislation of the European Union, she's going to be covered if this passes.
You'd have good protection with most journalists. I haven't met a journalist yet who's given up a source and would rather go to jail. Although if it happens to me, could you put in a good word for me with Tony, 2 knives, please?
Hello. Well, I'm really feel really lucky that I have the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you.
And with all of this wonderful panel, and in particular also with you, Mr. Kiriakou.
Thank you.
And I cannot wait to go home and tell to my men, to my two teenagers and my husband that I had this wonderful experience today.
Thank you very much.
And I hope that many, it's not easy to find all this courage to go through all of this. But congratulations and thank you for all of us. I'm wondering though, that, and I can understand I'm in the area of anti-corruption, and I'm a certified fraud examiner from ACFE. So I'm kind of familiar, I guess, with all of these things. And I do understand what Mr. Teloglu said about the team that you have to have in order to investigate some things. But we have not talked at all about anonymous reporting system or program that is, according to what we have learned, it's a very integral part of an anti-fraud, anti-corruption program that when you set an anti-corruption program, that you needed to have an anonymous, it's good to have an anonymous reporting line. And I can understand from all of the things that you have gone through that will help. Of course, I understand that you needed to have all this framework behind all of this in order to have an anonymous reporting, exactly, reporting to be effective. But I was wondering if in the world, somewhere else, I don't know if in Greece we have an efficient and effective one, but if it works, an anonymous reporting line or system works to reveal corruption cases or not.
I mean by the anonymous reporting, like anonymous Dropbox to media, or anonymous reporting to institutions like prosecutors' offices?
That someone anonymously can go and report something that it came to his or her attention, or knows more than just came to his attention. But understand that you needed to have a group afterwards, or a wonderful collaboration with the appropriate people to follow up with these things. But through the anonymous reporting, you can start an investigation. You can, if it goes to the right ears and to the right minds, then you can do. But of course, I understand that you needed to have a collaboration with different parts within a country to investigate. But I don't know if it works, if it's something like that, an anonymous line, it has worked in other societies.
So my understanding is that it has worked certainly in the journalism sphere. I can't speak as much for the investigatory sphere, although I understand by word of mouth that that's the case. One of the hard things about anonymizing technologies is that often both investigative journalists and investigators, prosecutors or investigators, will get a pile of information, and they need guidance for how to understand it. What am I looking for? It's 500 pages of document. And so if it's anonymous, but you don't have a continuing contact because you don't know how to reach them, yes, it can be very difficult. But there are technological ways where you can enable this. You can have systems that set this up. And these are often, I think, the most effective. At least I haven't seen formal studies on it, but I know from interviewing a number of whistleblowers as well as journalists across 10 countries who deal with them, that this is a very valuable system when you can actually set it up. But sometimes a little complex to use for the end user as well as for the organization to actually set up. Yeah.
Hello. Christian by name. So I want to ask you something. In conclusion to what you just said. So I'm like, are you implying that there must be a mutual understanding and a transparency between the two parties for it to work? I mean, for whistleblowing to have a positive effect?
It has to be. I don't think that the person receiving the information has to know the identity. I mean, I think the new Italian whistleblower law that was passed the end of last year, for example, doesn't give particular protection for anonymity, and other laws don't necessarily do so. But no, you don't have to be so for it to work. The thing is, you have to set up a system that will actually really provide the anonymity as opposed to pretending to provide it. I'll give you an example. A major media organization in Australia had a place where whistleblowers could come and drop information on their website about it. And they ran this for several years. It was not even encrypted. So anyone who could sniff the electronic traffic would be able to source the IP address, the internet phone number of where you were coming from, as well as see the information that was done. I mean, this is a basic security element that a large media organization should have done. So the answer is you can do it anonymously, and you can even have ongoing communication through an anonymous ID that's given to the whistleblower for them to come back and answer questions. And some commercial companies provide that. For example, outsource fraud services for big companies. But it has to be done properly, technically, to be effective.
So it's not relevant.
It's not what?
It's not relevant.
Oh, it's relevant. It's very relevant. It matters to the extent that I think a lot of whistleblowers won't come forward unless they're anonymous because they don't have proper protection in law. I mean, whistleblowing protection it's not one law or another law or an article of a single law. It's an ecosystem. I mean, what the whistleblower sees is, am I going to be protected in full or not? Not, do I only have protection in this little area or that little area, but I'm going to be exposed somewhere else? And this is how the lawmakers must think about it, but it's also how the company and government must think about it when they design the systems that interact with the whistleblowers. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I agree completely. I don't even know that there's anything I can add to that. No, seriously, I think that was it. You hit it on the head.
Hi, John. One question from me. You're an inspiration to all whistleblowers, and thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you. Thank you, Ari.
I heard very carefully what the panel said about implementing new legislations to an extent. They are new, that they are going to protect the whistleblowers. I haven't heard anything about fake news and cyberbullying.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do about it? And how does it affect John himself, his personal life, and his environment around him? Thank you.
You know, I not a single day goes by that I don't get emails from at least 2 or 3 people every day, every single day, who say they're whistleblowers. And what they're blowing the whistle on is that the CIA planted a chip in their brain to control their movements and their thoughts. The CIA is beaming waves at their head to make them do something, I don't know what. I've learned subsequently that this is actually a very common mental illness, right? So it's been my experience in just the last few years. Well, I can tell you, in the last few years, I've gotten, let's say, 2,000 of these inquiries. I've met 3 whistleblowers, real, honest-to-God whistleblowers, you being one, the most recent one. So there's an awful lot of fake information out there, not necessarily because people are trying to extend disinformation, as much as they really believe that they're whistleblowers. They really do. They really believe that the CIA snuck into their house the night before and put a chip in their brain. One man sent me his x-rays a copy of his x-rays that had to be very expensive. And it had a chip. Like, you could actually see an electronic chip. I mean, of course, it had to be fake, but this guy really believed that this had happened to him, and he wanted to blow the whistle, and he was upset because I wouldn't help him do it. I wouldn't introduce him to my journalist friends so he could do it. So you're right, there's an awful lot of fake information out there. Maybe not maliciously so, but it's just a fact of life. How do you deal with it? Because you must have inquiries from all kinds of people.
The problem is that if, you know, I get inquiries from people, and it's quite difficult, and as I'm sure do a lot of other people who are journalists, researchers, academics. Whistleblowers want solutions to a problem, and there often aren't agencies or organizations who are designed to give a holistic solution to their problem. That's why the inquiries come to John or to me or to other people. And in fact, that's one of the criteria that we recommend putting in place, is a holistic agency solution that a whistleblower can go to that will give this. And in fact, it's already being trialed in the Netherlands, the House of the Whistleblower, which is early days yet, but there seems to be some success on it. But in terms of fake news, I mean, my sort of high-level answer to that is that in an era of fake news, freedom of the press and freedom of speech is no longer the protection that it once was. So I think many of us believe in democratic institutions, and as part of that, freedom of speech and freedom of the press, because this is seen as a check and balance on corruption, wrongdoing in our society, being able to correct these things. But when you've got so much fake news and you can't differentiate it, it's no longer the mechanism it was. I've actually been doing research on this exact area in the technology space. I don't have easy solutions. My hypothesis is that possibly the only way you can counter it is to spend time and energy and resources teaching people how they are manipulated through exact cases, whether it's Cambridge Analytica and voting and other cases, because in this sense, you will inure the audience, protect them like a vaccine from being manipulated in future by fake news. But that's the only solution I've been able to come up with. And you often need whistleblowers to actually expose that.
Okay, one or two more questions, please, and then Elena Pataki, please. And then we'll get to the business of selling some books for John. I bought 3 myself already. I'm going to buy about 30 more. It was terrific. I'm going to send directions in my head, but there's nothing in it. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for sharing your experience with us. I would like to ask you something that I consider very critical for all people working or have worked at the 3-letter agencies. I can imagine how your superiors reacted when you decided to take action. But I wonder, how did your subordinates and your same rank officers responded to your initiative? I mean, did they blame you for breaking your oath, your confidentiality oath, and your non-disclosure agreement with the agency, or did they support you in your initiative?
Great question. And it's one that most people don't ask me. I expected to be utterly and completely cut off from the CIA. One of the issues was that my wife was still at the CIA when I blew the whistle, and she remained at the CIA for another 5 years. Much to my surprise, the day after I did it, I got an email from a retired deputy director of the CIA, a man that I had deeply respected. And he said, very simply, he said, "You've chosen a very difficult road. I'm glad somebody did it." He said, "I wish I had the guts for it to be me." And I thought, wow, okay, maybe this isn't going to be as bad as I thought it was going to be. Fast forward 4 years, I went to prison. 16 CIA officers visited me in prison. Visited me. Do you know the risk that they took? It's incredible. And I would tell each one of them, because they would write to me and say, "Listen, I want to come up on Saturday or Sunday." And I'd say, "Please, if this is going to cause any problems for you, don't do it." But they did, every single one of them. I worked for a man here in Athens who I greatly respected. And we lost touch over the years. But when I went to prison, he wrote to me and said the same thing that the deputy director had said. I wish I had the guts to do it. And we've rekindled our relationship, and we've been friends ever since. So the word that I've gotten from the CIA, well, it's twofold. One, of former CIA officers, it's been incredible support, shocking to me support. Of current CIA officers, it's very quiet support. They'll reach out, or they'll reach out through a mutual friend to say, good job. But no one has ever said anything against me, except at the very highest possible levels. George Tenet, listen, I really wanted to like George Tenet because in Elinas, in Albanos, but he says that he's Greek, right? So I really wanted to like him. George and I never liked each other, so I frankly don't give a shit what George Tenet thinks about me. But there were other people that, you know, I was disappointed in their reaction. Very high-ranking people. There's one other thing, too. When I caught Abu Zubaydah, this was the highest-ranking counterterrorism capture in the history of the CIA. So I got home, and 2 months later, I was passed over for promotion. And I said, I went to the deputy director of the Counterterrorism Center, and I said, what do I have to catch bin Laden to get promoted around here? And he said, look, what they said about you in your promotion panel, these were the exact words. They said that you displayed a shocking lack of commitment to counterterrorism. And I said, I caught the man, and not just him. I'm not allowed to say the number, but I caught many dozens of Al-Qaeda fighters that night. And they said, no, because you wouldn't be trained in the torture techniques. I said, they passed me over for that? And he said, yeah, because you wouldn't play ball with them. So I was angry and disappointed. Well, I was also friendly with the number 3 officer in the CIA. And we had lunch one day. And I said, I have to tell you, I'm very angry. Oh, what's wrong? I said, they passed me over for promotion. I caught Abu Zubaydah. They passed me over because I wouldn't learn these torture techniques. That afternoon, he promoted me. That afternoon. And he said, don't worry, we won't let something like this stand. So there are actually good people in there. Another thing, too, and I left this out of the story just for the sake of time, but I do say it in my first book. When they asked me if I wanted to be trained, I asked them first, just give me an hour. Because I thought, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just not thinking this through. So I went to see this man, the number 3. And I said, I need some advice. They asked me if I want to be trained in these techniques. I said, this sounds like a torture program to me, and I just want to make sure that I'm not crazy. And he said, oh, it's a torture program. He said, they can call it anything they want. Enhanced interrogation, whatever. It's a torture program. And torture is a slippery slope. And you know how these people are, he said. Somebody's going to go overboard, and they're going to kill a prisoner. And when that happens, there's going to be a congressional investigation, and then there's going to be a Justice Department investigation, and somebody's going to go to prison. Do you want to go to prison? I said, no, I don't want to go to prison. I was the only one who went to prison at the end of it. But I went back downstairs and I said, this is a torture program and I don't want to have anything to do with it. And I knew then, I mean, this was 2002. I knew then that I was right and they were wrong, and I had to just stick with my beliefs. That is exactly right. I wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post 4 weeks ago about the appointment of Gina Haspel as the new CIA director. Gina Haspel was the director of the torture program. And she's going to be the new director of the CIA. And I said in the Washington Post, what kind of message does this send to the CIA workforce? What kind of message does it send to our friends and allies, or even to our enemies? I'll tell you the message. The message is, You can commit war crimes. You can commit crimes against humanity. You can thumb your nose at the oversight of Congress, and you can still get promoted. And indeed, you can be promoted to director of the CIA. So why follow the law if you're going to be promoted anyway? What this tells our allies is when the State Department goes to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in any country in the world and says, listen, we're the United States, we're the toughest, strongest country in the world, you have to respect human rights because we're going to write this human rights report and we're going to go public with everything. And 15 minutes later, the CIA officer comes in and says, don't listen to the State Department guy. We want to open a secret prison in your country, and we're gonna get tough with these guys, but don't tell the State Department. And then they promote that woman to director of the CIA. And finally, the message that it sends to our enemies is, here is the most unpopular person we could possibly have found to be the director of the CIA. Now she is a recruitment tool for Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Because now they're saying, oh, well, the Americans want to fight? Look who they made the CIA director. The woman who was torturing us. The woman who threatened to kill our children. The woman who tried to kill the wife or the uncle or bomb the village or shoot a drone at the wedding or the funeral. That's who they make the CIA director? It makes people want to fight us. When I was interrogating these Al-Qaeda fighters, there was one theme through all of these dozens of interrogations. And the theme was, at that level, the fighter level, not the Bin Laden, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, those people, at the lower level, none of those people had any problem with the United States. First of all, they were not doing it for religion. They did not know the prayers. They did not read the Quran. Most of them couldn't even read anything, let alone the Quran. I told this one guy, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah, Malik Yuma. They don't know the prayers. So they said, I never had any problem with the United States until you bombed my village, and you killed my sister, and you killed my brother, and you killed my uncle, and you destroyed our town. Then what am I going to do? I have to fight the United States. Well, this appointment only makes things worse.
Well, that sounds like the right point to end this. And before you speak, first of all, giant thanks to you. Now I know what Phil Oakes meant, like Phil Oakes saying, we're the cops of the world. Just indulge myself one last moment. I have an Irish side too. My mother's name was Gibbons, and I know we should probably cite Greek philosophy here, but I'm going to go to Edmund Burke, who said that all it takes for evil to triumph is for one good man to do nothing. Here's one good man who did something, and evil did not triumph in this case, so you should be thanked for that. And he also said, as an Irish philosopher, there comes a point when forbearance is not a virtue. I'm going to dip into my Jameson later for some more Irish philosophy. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Kiriakou, on behalf of the Kiriakou family, we love you very much.
Thank you, Christina.
You are a hero. We thank you for being you, first of all, okay? God bless you, and I hope to see you in the U.S. soon.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing you very soon.
Elena? I guess you'll be staying to sign a few books, correct?
Absolutely.
Please, clean them out.
Hello. I'm extremely honored to be here, to be standing as a book and as a person, representing our publishing family. I think that all the panelists were, and Mr. Tabilis were amazing. We have been hearing a lot, people who didn't know what whistleblowing means. I knew it, of course, before, but I know, and I'm very relieved that you didn't know what you had done. And I would like to thank you, and I would like to thank our friend Michalis Ignatiou, who introduced me to you. I didn't believe my eyes when I saw his email introducing me to you. and asking if we would like to publish the book. And of course, I didn't expect then that you would be here today. We would be asking you to sign the books. And a lot of people didn't believe it, that the invitation was for a true event. Thank you. You are all heroes. I think networking is amazing, and people who try to change the law, to change the directives, and you are working together. I believe that you are here to work and not only to speak tonight. So congratulations to all of you, and thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Soulette, for coming from Australia. My partner grew up in Sydney. We went back a couple of years ago to a Greek community. She hadn't been back for 46 years, and now we have a third home, second home, third home. Anna, thank you so much for your presence. Mariana, thank you for what you did for this panel and for this cause. Tasso, the inimitable, the great Tasso Telugu, thank you so much. And please, the books are for sale. Thank you so much, and spread the word, please, okay? And don't forget, if you see something wrong, blow that whistle.
Thanks.
And also, I would like to thank our team, Manos Giritas, the translator.